Del Harmon burned his clothes in a steel drum behind the Moose Creek station on the last night of August, and I watched him do it from the corral where I had gone to look at a mare with a stone bruise. He fed the fire one piece at a time: the green jacket with the pine tree patch on the shoulder, the flat hat. He took his wallet apart and dropped the cards in singly, and he held each photograph up to the light of the flames before he let it go, and there were a good many photographs, and he was a long time at it. He stood in his undershirt in the cold with the fire moving on his face, and he did not look like a man in grief, and he did not look like a man gone wrong in his head. He looked like a man at the end of a shift. I said his name. He did not turn around. "Go on to bed, Cole," he said. I stood there with the mare's lead in my hand. The drum breathed and threw sparks up into the dark, and the sparks went out among the stars over the ridge, and the ridge stood black against them. Del dropped the last photograph in and watched it curl. Then he walked out past the tack shed in his boots and his trousers and his undershirt, and he went into the timber north of the airstrip, and the timber took him. In the morning he was gone, and his bed had not been slept in, and his badge was in the ashes of the drum where it had not burned. They flew a plane up the Selway for 3 days. They put men on the trails, and they dragged the deep pools below the pack bridge with grapples, and brought up a sunken fir log and an elk skull soft with moss, and nothing else. The district ranger came in from Fenn on the 4th day, a heavy man named Prather with white hair at his temples, and he sat me down in the station kitchen and asked me what I had seen. I told him. The drum, the clothes, the photographs, Del walking north into the trees like a man going to work. Prather looked at the table for a while. Outside, a jay was going on about something in the firs, and there was no other sound anywhere in that country. "Did you hear anything that night?" he said. "Like what?" "Music." I looked at him. He was not smiling, and he was not going to smile. His hands lay on the table like two tools he had set down. "No, sir," I said. "I didn't hear any music." He nodded slowly, the way a man nods at news he has heard before. Then he told me that what would go in the report was that Del Harmon was believed drowned in the Selway River, and that the burning of the clothes did not need to go in the report, and that I was a seasonal packer with a good record and a future in the outfit if I wanted one. He said all this quietly and without threat, and that was somehow worse than threat. When he left, he stopped in the doorway with his hat in his hand. "You'll be taking the strings up alone now till we sort out the roster," he said. "Stay on the trail. Whatever you come on up there, you stay on the trail and you come home. You understand me?" "What would I come on?" He put his hat on. "Country's big," he said, and went out to the plane. They had said the same kind of thing about the man before Del. I had heard it secondhand from the older packers, how Ellis Vane had run the district back before my time, and one October he was gone, and the word was he had taken a job in Alaska, though no one had a letter from him, and no one ever did. 20-some years Del had held it since. I thought about that some in the days after, and then the work came down on me like weather, and I quit thinking about it, because there were lookouts to supply before the snow, and I was the only packer left on that side of the river. I took 9 head up the Selway Trail the second week of September, with grain and propane and winter groceries for the lookout on Schisler Peak. The river ran low and green below the trail, and the cedars stood in the bottoms 150 feet and better, old trees, older than any name on any map of that country, and the trail went along beneath them in a cold shade that the sun never fully found. The mules went quietly. Mules will tell you things if you listen, and all that first day they told me nothing, and I was glad of it. The second day they began to tell me something. It started with the lead mule, an honest gray named Ruth who had never in 4 seasons offered me a moment's foolishness. She stopped on a straight open stretch of trail with her ears up the slope, and she would not move. The others bunched behind her. I got down and went up the line talking to them, and their eyes were white-rimmed and their nostrils worked at the air coming down off the mountain. I could smell nothing but cedar and river. I stood there holding Ruth's cheekpiece and looking up the slope into the timber where the light failed among the trunks, and I listened, and there was nothing to hear. No birds. That was the thing I noted and did not want to note. A still afternoon in September in that country and not one bird. I got them moving with more trouble than I will set down here, and we made the meadows at Bear Creek near dark, and I picketed them close and built the fire bigger than I needed it. In the last light, I walked out to the creek for water, and that is where I found the wolf. It was in a spruce at the meadow's edge, wedged in a fork of the tree a good 15 feet off the ground, and it was the biggest wolf I had ever seen or heard tell of, long as a man is tall, and heavy in the shoulders in a way that was wrong for a wolf. The forelegs too thick, the skull too broad. It had been dead some days. There was no blood beneath the tree and no sign on the ground, and no explanation for how a thing of that weight had come to rest 15 feet up a spruce, and I stood beneath it in the failing light with the bucket in my hand and the cold coming up off the creek. Between two trees at the far side of the meadow something was strung. Fine, pale lines in the dusk, 4 or 5 of them, drawn taut from trunk to trunk at about the height of a man's chest. When the air moved down the meadow, they gave off a low sound, a hum, faint and almost sweet, and the mules on their pickets swung their heads toward it all together like one animal. I did not go across the meadow to look at what was strung there. I want that plainly understood. I went back to the fire and I sat with my back to the stock and the rifle across my knees, and the sound came and went with the air all night, and in the morning the wolf was gone from the tree, and the lines were gone from the trunks, and the birds were back, singing over that meadow like nothing had ever hung in it at all. I loaded my mules and went on up the trail, deeper into the country, because that was the work, and there was no one behind me to do it. The trail from Bear Creek to Schisler Peak climbs 4,000 feet in 11 miles, and the country changes as you go the way a man's life changes, slow, and then all at once. The cedars give out and the lodgepole comes in, and then the lodgepole gives out and there is only white bark and granite and the wind. I made the lookout on the 3rd evening with the mules worn down and the light going copper on the peaks across the river, range after range of them running north into Montana with no road in any of it, and no light in any of it, and nothing in it at all that a man had made except the small glass room on the rock above me. The lookout was a woman named Marn, who had sat that peak for 11 summers. She came down the rock path in a wool coat with her braid gone gray, and she looked past me at the country I had come out of before she ever looked at me. "You come up the river trail," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Camp at Bear Creek." I did. She took hold of Ruth's halter, and the mule leaned her head into the woman like they were old family. Marn watched me over the mule's neck. "Anything in the meadow," she said. I unloaded the panniers and did not answer while I did it, and she did not ask again, and that was how I knew she already knew. We packed the winter goods up the rock in silence. Inside the lookout the stove was going and there was coffee, and the windows gave onto 100 miles of dark falling on dark. She set out biscuits and elk, and we ate without talk, and afterward she rolled a cigarette and smoked half of it and put it out with a small, hard motion, and then she talked. "There's wolves in this country that aren't wolves," she said. "You know that or you don't. If you don't, there's no sense in me going on." I looked at my coffee. I thought about the shoulders on the thing in the spruce, the forelegs thick as a man's arm. "I've heard the packers talk," I said. "Oberotny," the old Basque herder used to call them. Werewolves. I took it for stove talk. Stove talk. She said it flat, like she was setting the words on a scale. 14 years back, one of them came through that window there. I was 39 years old and I put 6 rounds into it inside this room, and it went back out the way it came and took the window frame with it. I sat that whole night in the corner with an empty rifle. Come morning there was blood on the rock going down the east face. Regular red blood. She looked at me. "So no, not stove talk. It never came back?" "They don't want us," she said. "Get that straight and keep it straight. They're not good and they're not the devil either. They're like weather. A wolverine don't hate you, but you don't go take a fish away from one." The stove ticked. Far below in the black, the river made a sound like breath. "Then what was that at Bear Creek?" I said. "What kills something like that and hangs it in a tree with no mark on the ground?" Marn got up and moved the coffee pot to the cool side of the stove, and it was a while before I understood that she was not going to answer that. Not because she had no answer, but because she would not say it indoors, at night, with the windows dark. When she spoke again, it was about the weather coming, an early storm off the Gulf of Alaska that the radio had been going on about, and she told me to leave the mules picketed in the saddle meadow and get down the mountain by the north trail come first light, the short way, the steep way. I said the North Trail was a horse killer. She said the storm was worse. I lay that night on the floor of the lookout in my bag, and sometime deep in the dark, Marn's voice came from her bunk, low, like a woman talking in her sleep, though she was not asleep. "Del Harmon come up here every June," she said. 20 years running. He'd sit where you're laying and never say much. Last June he told me his time was about up. I asked him was he sick. He said no. He said the term was up. That's the word he used, term, like a man talking about a lease on a building. I asked him a term of what? The wind leaned on the glass. He just said whoever come up the trail after him, I was to feed them and start them down the north side. So I guess that's you. I did not sleep after that. We came down off the peak in the dark before dawn with the mules strung out and lanterns fore and aft, and the storm was already a wall of dirty wool standing across the north sky. The North Trail drops through burned timber, 10,000 silver snags standing dead from the fires of some summer before I was born, and it was in that dead forest with the light coming gray that we met them. They came up out of the draw below us at a run. I counted 5, and there may have been more. Big, dark shapes moving through the snags, and Ruth screamed and the string blew up behind me and I came off my saddle horse into the rocks with the lead rope burning through my hand. I got the rifle up. I need to set down what I saw plainly because everything I later came to understand hangs on it. They did not come at us. They split around the stock the way water splits around a stone, and one of them passed within 20 feet of me, and it turned its head and looked at me as it went, and its eyes were not an animal's eyes. And there was nothing in them for me at all. No hunger, no anger. What was in them was behind them, back down the draw, back the way they had come. I have seen that look on horses coming out of a burning barn. They were gone up the mountain in half a minute. The Oberotny, the werewolves, 5 of the only things in that country that had cause to fear nothing, running from the low ground into a storm. I gathered the stock. It took the better part of an hour, and one mule I never did find. And by then the snow had begun, small, hard flakes coming level out of the north, and I stood in that dead silver forest doing arithmetic I did not want to do. The North Trail went down the draw, down the way they had come running from. The way back over the peak was 6 hours gone and the storm would close it in 2. Ruth stood shaking against my shoulder. Down in the draw, under the sound of the wind coming, there was another sound, faint, and I had heard it once before at the edge of a meadow in the dark, and it was strung wire moving in air, or something like wire, and it was almost sweet, and it was not any kind of sweet you would go toward if you had anywhere on earth else to go. I did not have anywhere else to go. I took up the lead rope and started the string downhill. The draw narrowed as it fell, and the snags gave way to green timber again, old hemlock and spruce that the fires had passed around, and the snow came down through them fine as ash. The sound grew as we went. It was not one string now, but many, low tones and high ones moving against each other without hurry, and there was an order in it, and that was the worst of it, that it was not noise. Noise I could have stood. The mules went with their heads low and their ears pinned, and they went, which I did not understand then and understand now. They had been told to. We came around a shoulder of rock, and below us lay a park of maybe 10 acres, a winter elk meadow with the creek running through it under new ice, and I stopped the string in the trees and looked down into that meadow, and everything I thought I knew about that country ended there. The werewolves had not all run. 3 of them were in the meadow. 2 stood at the far tree line, and even at that distance I could see how they stood, half turned to go, held there by something that was not courage. The 3rd was in the open ground near the creek, and it was the biggest of them, gray through the shoulders, and it was walking a slow circle around the thing that sat in the middle of the meadow, and it was screaming at it. I had never heard one of them give voice. It was a sound with words almost in it, and what the words almost were was pleading. The thing it circled sat still in the falling snow. I will set it down the way I saw it, and no other way. It was the size of a big horse lying down, though it did not lie. It sat upright the way a man sits, and its frame was long and narrow and jointed in more places than a frame should be. It was pale, not white, pale the way old wood under bark is pale, and its hide had a grain to it like that wood. Its arms were too long, and there were 4 of them, folded, the way a man folds his arms to wait. It had no wings and no horns and none of the furniture the old stories hang on their devils. Its head was narrow and long and bare, and its face was calm. That is the only word I have. Calm, the way high granite is calm. Strung between its two upper hands, from the fingers of one to the fingers of the other, ran the strings. Its own fingers were the frame. It played them with its lower hands, without hurry, and the music came up the draw and out over the meadow and into the timber where I stood with my mules, and the snow fell through it. The gray werewolf stopped circling. It stood square to the seated thing at maybe 30 feet, and it gathered itself the way anything gathers itself when running is done, and I wanted to look away and I did not, because some part of me already knew that watching was going to be my work. It went in fast and low, and it never arrived. The pale thing moved once. I cannot tell you what the movement was. A hand left the strings and returned to the strings, and the music never lost its measure, and the gray werewolf was down in the snow at the creek, and it did not move again, and the meadow was as quiet under the music as it had been before. Sudden as a tree letting go its load of snow, and no more remark than that. The two at the tree line broke. One made the timber, the other did not, and I will not set down the manner of its ending except that the pale thing rose for it, and rose taller than I have let myself remember, and that afterward it fed, unhurried, the way a man eats who is not hungry but has decided to eat, and the snow came down on all of it alike. Ruth stood at my shoulder the whole of it and never moved. 9 mules and a saddle horse in plain view and plain scent of that meadow, and they stood like stone, and I understood that we had been given quarter. It had known we were in the trees since before we came around the rock. We did not signify. I have stood in a rain that soaked me to the skin and known that the rain intended me nothing, and it was like that. And a man cannot stand long in that kind of knowing without something in him shifting to bear the weight. It finished. It took up the dead from the creek, the big gray one, and carried it to a spruce at the meadow's edge, and set it high in a fork of the tree, gently, the way you would put a thing on a shelf you meant to come back for, or meant only to have seen. Then it settled again in the open snow and folded its long arms and made its strings and played, and the music changed. It had been going out over the country before, broadcast, a thing between it and the land. Now it came up the draw to where I stood. I felt the difference the way you feel a man's eyes find you in a crowded room. The mules felt it. Ruth turned her head and looked at me, and there are those who will say a mule cannot look at a man that way, and they were not on that mountain. It was calling me down. I want to write that I fought it. There was nothing to fight. It was not a hook in my mind dragging me. It was plainer and worse than that. It was the knowledge, arriving whole, the way you suddenly know a thing you have been circling for years, that I could walk down into that meadow and stand before it and live, and that this had been true of one man in that country at a time, going back longer than the trees, and that the man before me had burned his clothes in a steel drum and walked north with his term ended, and that the country had never once in my life been empty and unmanaged and wild, that it had been kept, all of it, the whole 100 miles of dark I had looked out on from the lookout glass, kept the way a garden is kept, and that the keeper was sitting in the snow below me playing, and the position was open. I tied the string off to a hemlock. My hands did that. I walked down through the falling snow into the meadow, and the music took no notice of my coming, and took notice of nothing. And I stopped 10 feet from it, closer than the werewolf had gotten, and it looked at me the way the granite looks at the river. Its face was calm, and old past any counting, and there was no evil in it that a man could find and name. And I stood before it and understood that this was not mercy. Evil would have been smaller. Evil you can hate. What sat in the snow before me hated nothing in this world except the Oberotni, the werewolves, and it hated them the way a flood hates a levee, for reasons that were its own and old and none of mine, and everything else that walked, the elk and the men, and the towns full of men sleeping down along the rivers, it simply kept and spared, and would not always spare, and wanted one of us standing by while it did all of it. A witness, a hand, whatever Dell had been for 20 years and Ellis Vane before him. It lowered its head to my height. Its breath was cold and smelled of snowmelt and split stone. Then it lifted one of its lower hands and touched me on the chest, one finger, light as ash falling, over the badge I did not wear yet, and the storm came down over the meadow and the mountains and the whole of that country like a lid coming down, and I did not run. That is the whole of it. It marked me, and I did not run. And up in the timber my mules stood waiting in the snow to carry me back down to the world of men, to which I no longer fully belonged. They made me district ranger the following spring. Prather flew in from Fenn and sat me down in the same kitchen and slid the papers across the table and did not meet my eyes while I signed them. And when it was done, he sat back and looked out the window at the ridge for a long while. "You saw it," he said. "Yes. I never did. 31 years in this outfit, and I never went past Bear Creek if there was any way around it." He turned his hat in his hands. "Dell used to send word down, where not to put a trail crew, what drainage to close and call it Grizzly. One October he had me pull every hunter off the Selway side in a single day, and I did it and never asked." He stood and put his hat on. "I expect you'll send the same kind of word." "I expect I will." He stopped at the door the way he had before. "That music," he said. "I heard it once. 19 and I was on a fire crew up Moose Creek, and it come down the mountain about dark. Foreman turned us around and marched us 6 miles out by headlamp and wouldn't say why." He looked at me. "I've slept poorly since, and I never even saw the thing. I don't know how you're fixin' to sleep at all." I slept fine. That is a thing I have never told anyone, and I set it down here plainly. From that first winter, I slept like a man who has quit a long argument. The work was the work. I kept the trails and the lookouts and the pack strings, and I kept the other ledger too, the one that never went to Fenn. When the music moved to a new drainage, I closed that drainage. Washout, I wrote. Bridge failure. Bear activity. In 7 years, I turned back or rerouted more people than I could count. Elk hunters and through hikers, and one film crew from California that wanted the big cedars. And every one of them went home irritated and alive, and none of them ever knew what the irritation had bought them. The country had a keeper, and the keeper had a hand, and the hand was mine. And the people down along the rivers slept in their beds and called that country wilderness, and I let them. The werewolves I did not keep. I want that set down without varnish. In my third autumn, 4 of them came through from the Bitterroot side, running west, worn thin, and they laid up in the cedar bottoms below the pack bridge. And I knew the bottoms, and I knew what slept there and what did not, and I could have ridden down and hazed them on west to open country in a day. I sat on the station porch instead and drank my coffee and did the arithmetic of my office. They were not mine to keep. Nothing in my term said so. Nothing needed to. 2 nights later, the music came down the river soft as snowfall, and in the morning the bottoms were quiet, and there was a shape high in the fork of a cedar that had not been there. And I rode past it on the trail and did not stop and did not look up, and Ruth did not so much as swing an ear. We had both come to our understanding by then. There is a kind of man who would call what I did that week a sin, and a kind who would call it duty, and I have quit belonging to either kind. It never spoke to me. In 7 years, it never once made a sound that was meant as speech. But it would suffer me near while it played, in the high meadows in the late light, and sometimes it would set its narrow head at an angle while I made my report of the country. The trails moved, the men turned back, and whether it heard me or only heard the sound of me, I never learned, and quit needing to learn. It hated one thing in the world, and the reason was older than the trees, and it never gave the reason, and I quit needing that too. You can serve a thing you do not understand. Men have done it in churches and armies all their lives and called it faith or orders. I did it on a mountain and called it nothing. Last June, I rode up to Schisler with the summer goods. Marn poured the coffee and we sat with the 100 miles of country going blue in the glass, and I heard myself say it, the same way Dell had said it in that same room. "My time's about up." She did not ask, was I sick? She looked at me a long moment and then out at the peaks. 20 years is what Dell got, she said. You didn't get but 7. It's not a wage, I said. It's done when it's done. There'll be somebody up the trail after me. Young fellow, most likely, whoever draws the packing. Feed him and start him down the north side. She turned her cup on the table. Where did Dell go, she said. That night. Walking north. I stood and took my hat. Out the window the light was leaving the Selway crags, one by one the way lamps go out in a far town. The same place I'm going, I said, and that was the last time I saw her. Tonight the drum stands behind the Moose Creek station, and the fire is up in it and burning clean. I have fed it the green jacket and the flat hat. The badge would not burn, and I did not expect it to, And the new man will find it in the ashes and be told what Prather tells him. And one night the mules will stop for him on an open stretch of trail, and it will go with him the way it went with me, because it has gone that way in this country since before the country had a name. My license is in. The cards. The photographs went one at a time. My mother on the porch at Grangeville. A girl I was once nearly married to. Myself at 19 holding a string of trout, each one held up to the light and then let go, and the last of them is curling now, and the man in it is nobody, and nobody is what walks north from here. It is sitting at the edge of the firelight in the frost, upright in the dark the way a man sits, its long arms folded and unfolded, and its strings are strung finger to finger, and it is playing, low, unhurried, a music with an order in it that no man will ever write down. The sparks go up and out among the stars, and the ridge stands black under them, and the country runs north from this fire 100 miles without one light in it, kept, all of it, and the snow that is coming has already crossed the border in the dark. I am done writing. The fire wants tending, and after that there is the walking, and the music does not stop, and the country goes on without end.